Not on the news, not in the papers, but in a quiet engineering office in Portland, 3 senior engineers had been staring at the same set of stress reports for 9 straight days. The numbers did not add up. The bridge was only 12 years old. It should not be cracking. And the city wanted answers in 72 hours. Then a man named Daniel walked into the room. He was carrying a mop and a bucket. He was the night janitor. He had no degree, no license, no business being there at all. He looked at the report on the table for maybe 10 seconds. Then he said, very softly, "You're reading the wrong drawing." The lead engineer laughed. The CEO heard about it the next morning and fired him on the spot. For interfering with technical work he was not qualified to touch. She did not know one thing. She did not know that 12 years earlier, the man she just fired was the one who designed that bridge. This is a story about respect, about the people we walk past every day without seeing, and about what happens when a quiet man finally decides to speak. Stay with me to the end. The last 5 minutes will change how you look at the people around you. Daniel Hayes lived in a 1-bedroom apartment on the edge of Portland. The building was old. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee and damp wood. But his apartment was clean. Spotless, actually. The kind of clean that comes from a person who has very little and takes care of every piece of it. There were 2 coffee mugs on the counter, one blue, one yellow. The yellow one had a small chip on the rim. He never threw it out. It belonged to his daughter. Her name was Hannah. She was 6 years old. Hannah had a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Button. She carried him everywhere, to breakfast, to the bathroom, to bed. She had named him after a button on her mother's old coat. Daniel never corrected her about that. He just smiled every time she said the name out loud. On Monday morning, Hannah sat at the kitchen table in her pajamas. She was wearing socks with little yellow ducks on them. She always wore the duck socks on Mondays. She said Mondays needed luck. Daniel had never argued with her about that either. "Daddy," she said, looking up from her toast, "are you coming home early today?" Daniel paused. He was packing her lunchbox, a peanut butter sandwich, an apple, a small note he wrote every single morning. Today's note said, "You are stronger than yesterday." He closed the lunchbox. "I'll try," he said. That was the answer he gave most days. Not a promise, not a no, just the truth, because between morning and night the world had too many things in it that one man could not control. Hannah nodded. She trusted him. She always trusted him. He tied her shoes. He pulled the laces tight. Not too tight, not too loose. Just right. For 1 second his mind started measuring the friction of the knot, the angle of the loop, the tension at each crossing point. Then he stopped himself. He looked away. Like a man looking away from a mirror he was not ready to face. He had been a different person, once. The cleaning company that paid him was called Brightway Services. They had a contract with a firm called Meridian Engineering. Meridian was a mid-sized civil engineering company in downtown Portland. They built bridges, highways, and water systems all over the Pacific Northwest. Daniel cleaned their offices 5 nights a week, Tuesday through Saturday, from 9 at night until 5 in the morning. He had been doing it for 8 months. The people who worked there did not know his last name. Most of them did not know his first name either. He was just the janitor, or the guy who comes in at night, or, sometimes, just a quiet figure in a grey uniform who wiped down their desks while they were home asleep. He never asked for attention. He never made noise. He emptied the trash. He vacuumed the carpets. He cleaned the glass walls of the conference rooms. But sometimes, when no one was around, he would stop in front of the large blueprints pinned to the walls of the engineering floor. He would stand there for a minute, maybe two. He would tilt his head. He would trace one finger in the air, just above the paper, never touching it. And then he would move on. Once, a young engineer came back to the office late at night to grab a laptop he had forgotten. He saw Daniel standing in front of a blueprint, completely still. The young engineer thought it was strange, but he was tired. He just nodded and walked away. He told someone about it the next day. Just a small joke at the coffee machine. The janitor was looking at the bridge plans last night, like he understood them. Everyone laughed. No one followed up. The CEO of Meridian Engineering was a woman named Claire Bennett. She was 28 years old. She had taken over the company 18 months ago after her father, the founder, had passed away from a long illness. Claire had grown up in that building. She used to do her homework on the conference room floor when she was 8. Her father used to let her stamp the corner of approved drawings with the company seal. She thought, back then, that engineers were a kind of magician. Now she ran the place. 210 employees, 6 offices across the country, 43 active projects. And she was learning, slowly, that being the boss is not the same thing as knowing what the boss should do. Her father had left her one piece of advice. He wrote it in a card she kept in her desk drawer. Listen to the building. Listen to the people in it. Most of all, listen to the ones nobody else does. She read it almost every morning. She was still figuring out what it meant. The other man in this story was named Victor. Victor Reyes was the chief operating officer. He was 46. He had worked at Meridian for 14 years. He had worked under Claire's father, and now he was working under Claire. He did not love that. Victor was smooth. He was polished. He always wore the same kind of dark blue suit. He had a calm voice. He never raised it. He smiled at people in a way that made them feel both seen and slightly nervous. When Claire's father got sick, Victor had assumed he would be the next CEO. Claire's father had hinted at it, promised it almost. But in the last weeks of his life, Claire's father had changed his mind. He had passed the company to his daughter. Victor had smiled at the funeral. He had shaken Claire's hand. He had said the right things. But inside, something had broken, and he had been quietly waiting for it to mend ever since. The bridge was called the Elkwood River Crossing. It was a 4-lane vehicle bridge about 50 miles east of Portland. It had been built 12 years earlier by Meridian Engineering in partnership with the State Department of Transportation. It carried about 30,000 cars per day. It was not the longest bridge in the state. It was not the most famous, but it was important. A lot of small towns depended on it. In late September, an inspector found cracks. Small ones at first. Hairline fractures in 2 of the support columns. The cracks were in a place that was not supposed to crack. Not for another 40 years. The state called Meridian. Meridian sent a team. The team came back confused. The lead engineer was a man named Walter. He was 45, MIT graduate, 20 years in the industry. He sat down in his office on a Wednesday morning, pulled up the original blueprints, and went through them line by line. The numbers did not match. The stress points on the bridge were appearing in places that the blueprint said should never have stress. The load was distributing wrong. The angles were off. Either the bridge was built incorrectly, or the blueprints were wrong, or something else was happening that nobody understood. Walter spent 3 days on it. He brought in 2 outside consultants. They left on the 3rd day with no answer. By Friday, the state was getting nervous. They were talking about closing the bridge. Closing it would cost millions. It would cut off 3 towns. It would destroy Meridian's reputation. Victor called an emergency meeting. He stood at the head of the conference room. His suit was perfect. His voice was calm. He laid out 2 options. 1. Close the bridge, take the loss, take the public relations hit. 2. Build a temporary support structure, buy time, hope nothing collapses while they figure it out. Both options would hurt the company. Both options would hurt Claire personally. Her name was on the contract now. Her family's name was on the bridge. She listened. She did not speak for a full minute. Then she said quietly, "There has to be a 3rd option." Victor smiled, the smile of a man being patient with a child. "Sometimes, Claire," he said, "there isn't." Daniel was in the room. Not at the table, not even near it. He was at the back, behind a partition wall, quietly emptying a recycling bin. He had come in early that day to cover a co-worker's shift. He was wearing his grey uniform. Nobody noticed him. Nobody ever noticed him. He heard everything. When the meeting ended, he stayed behind the partition. He set the recycling bin down. He stood very still. Then, almost to himself, he whispered, "It's not the columns. It's the load transfer. They're reading the revised plans, not the originals." He picked up the bin. He walked out. That night, after he made dinner for Hannah and read her 2 chapters of a book about a mouse who wanted to be a pilot, he sat at the kitchen table. He pulled out a blank notebook from a drawer. Plain paper, nothing fancy. He started to draw. Not slowly, not carefully. His hand moved across the page like he was writing his own name. The lines were exact, the angles were exact. The numbers in the margins came out without him even pausing to think. He drew for almost 3 hours. When he was done, he had reproduced the original load transfer schematic of the Elkwood River crossing. Every beam, every joint, every measurement. From memory. He closed the notebook. He looked at it for a long time. Then he made a decision. The next morning was Saturday. Hannah was at her grandmother's house, which was where she went every Saturday. Daniel drove to the Meridian office. He was not scheduled to work. He was not supposed to be there. But his ID badge worked at the front door, and the security guard at the front desk knew his face. The guard, an older man named Earl, smiled and waved him through. "Forgot my jacket," Daniel said. Earl nodded. He had no reason to doubt him. Daniel had never lied to anyone in that building. Daniel went up to the engineering floor. The lights were off. The desks were empty. He walked to Walter's office. He took out a folder he had brought with him. Inside the folder was the schematic he had drawn the night before. He had made a clean version of it that morning on engineering paper he bought at a local supply store with his own money. He placed it on Walter's desk. He did not write a note. He did not sign it. He left. On Monday morning, Walter walked into his office, set down his coffee, and saw the folder. He opened it. He sat down very, very slowly. He spent the next 4 hours alone with that drawing. He compared it to the official blueprints. He compared it to the stress reports. The drawing on his desk was correct. The official blueprints were wrong. Somewhere in the last 12 years, somebody had revised the load transfer specifications. Whoever did it had simplified the original design. They had removed 2 crossbeams that, on paper, looked unnecessary. In reality, those crossbeams were what kept the load from concentrating on the support columns. The bridge was not failing because it was old. The bridge was failing because somebody had been working from the wrong drawing for over a decade. Walter stood up. He walked straight to Claire's office. He said one sentence. "Someone in this building knows the answer. And they are not in this room." Victor heard about the drawing within an hour. He went down to the engineering floor. He looked at the folder on Walter's desk. He looked at the schematic. His face did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted. He walked back to his office. He closed the door. He pulled up the security footage from Saturday morning. He saw Daniel walk in. He saw Daniel walk to the engineering floor. He saw him leave the folder on Walter's desk. Victor sat back in his chair. For a long time he did not move. Then he made a phone call. That afternoon, Claire was called into Victor's office. He had a folder of his own. He laid it out on the table. "We have a security issue," he said. He showed her the security footage. He showed her the timestamp. This man entered a restricted floor on a day he was not scheduled. He left an unauthorized document on a senior engineer's desk. He has no engineering qualifications. He has no business interfering with our technical work. Claire watched the footage. She saw Daniel's face for the first time. She had never met him. She had never spoken to him. She did not even know he worked for the company. "Is the document accurate?" she asked. Victor paused. "That is not the point. I am asking anyway." Victor straightened the folder. "Claire, we are under contract review with the state. We have a regulatory inspection in 8 weeks. If it comes out that an unlicensed janitor was modifying our technical files, we are finished, even if his drawing is correct. Especially if it is correct, because then they will ask why our own engineers missed it." He leaned forward. "This is about precedent. We cannot allow people to step outside their roles." Claire was quiet. 18 months ago, she would have agreed immediately. She was still learning when to push back. And Victor was not entirely wrong about the regulatory risk. She sighed. She picked up a pen. She signed the termination notice. Daniel was called in at 4 in the afternoon. He stood in front of Claire's desk in his grey uniform. His hands were folded in front of him. He did not sit. He had not been offered a chair. His eyes moved across the room. Just for a second. They stopped on a framed photograph on the wall behind her desk. It was a photograph of the Elkwood River crossing, taken on the day it opened 12 years ago. There were people in hard hats standing in front of it, smiling, cutting a ribbon. In the bottom corner of the photograph, almost too small to see, there were 2 men shaking hands. One of them was Claire's father. The other one was a young man, maybe 23 years old, tall, thin, quiet eyes. The young man in the photograph had Daniel's face. But Claire was not looking at the photograph. She was looking at the termination notice on her desk. "Daniel," she said, "can you explain why you entered the engineering floor on Saturday?" "I left a drawing for Walter." "You don't have authorization to do that. The drawing was correct." "That isn't what I asked." Victor was standing to her left. His voice was smooth. "Mr. Hayes, do you understand what kind of liability you have created? Do you have any engineering credentials? What exactly qualified you to touch our work?" Daniel did not look at Victor. He kept his eyes on Claire. He spoke very softly. "Do you want the bridge to stand? Or do you want the paperwork to be correct?" The room went silent. It was not a rude question. It was not aggressive. It was just the most direct way of asking what he was actually asking. Claire looked down at her desk. Victor placed one hand on the back of her chair, just lightly, almost not there. She looked up. "I'm sorry, Daniel. Your conduct violated company policy. We are ending your contract today." Daniel was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he nodded, slowly. He buttoned the top button of his grey work shirt. He looked at Claire one last time. "Before you sign off on the bridge repair," he said, "you should look for the original blueprints, the first ones, not the revised set, They should still be in your father's archive. If the company kept them. He turned around. He walked out. Claire stood at the window after he left. Her office was on the 15th floor. Below her, 15 floors down, the city moved like it always did. Cars, people, a man pushing a cart full of flowers across the street. She had a strange feeling in her chest. Not guilt exactly, something quieter, something older. The phrase Daniel had used kept coming back to her, the original blueprints. He had said it like it meant something more than just a stack of papers. She turned to Victor. How long has Daniel worked here? 8 months. The cleaning contract is annual. What was his last name? Victor checked his folder. Hayes. Hayes, Claire repeated. It did not mean anything to her in that moment. But she wrote it down anyway, on a small notepad she kept in her drawer. That evening she went home. She did not eat. She sat on her couch and stared at the wall. Around 11 at night, she opened her laptop. She typed a name into the company's old employee database, the one that went back 20 years. Daniel Hayes. The system returned no results. She tried again. D. Hayes. Still nothing. She tried Hayes by itself. One result came back, from 13 years ago. The full name was David Hayes. She stared at the screen. David Hayes, junior structural engineer, hired at age 22, resigned after 3 years, last project. Elkwood River Crossing Bridge. She clicked on the file. There was a photo. It was old, low quality, the kind of badge photo that companies used in the early 2000s. It was Daniel, younger, thinner, but unmistakable. She sat back in her chair. She read the file 3 times. Then she opened a second tab and searched for the name in her father's personal email archive, the one she had inherited but never fully gone through. The search came back with 64 results. She started reading. She did not sleep that night. By morning, she had pieced most of it together. David Daniel Hayes had joined Meridian 13 years ago, straight out of a state university, where he had finished a structural engineering degree at the age of 21. He had been hired by Claire's father personally, after a professor had sent her father a sample of David's work. He was, by every account in those emails, brilliant, quiet, focused, the kind of young engineer who could see how forces moved through a structure the way other people see colors. He had worked on 3 projects in his first year. By his second year, he was being given lead design responsibility on a major contract, the Elkwood River Crossing. He had designed it almost entirely by himself. Claire's father had reviewed and approved every page. There were emails between them late at night, arguing about beam thickness and load tolerances. Her father had loved working with him. He had called him the most patient engineer I have ever met in one email to a colleague. The bridge opened. It was a success. There was a small ceremony. 3 months later, David's wife was killed in a car accident. She was 25 years old. She had been driving home from her sister's house. A truck driver had fallen asleep at the wheel. She had left behind a baby girl, 6 months old. David had stopped coming to work. After 2 weeks, he had sent in a resignation letter. Just 1 paragraph. He thanked Claire's father for everything. He said he could not continue. He apologized. He had disappeared. Claire's father had tried to reach him. 3 letters, 2 voicemails, no reply. After a year, her father had stopped trying. The bridge had stayed up. The original blueprints had been filed away, and 8 years later, a junior engineer at Meridian had decided that 2 of the cross beams in the design were unnecessary and had revised the maintenance specifications. The revision had been approved by a project lead who did not know any better. and then by another. And then it had become the standard reference. Nobody had remembered to check it against the original. Nobody had remembered the man who built it. Claire found one more thing in her father's archive. A letter in her father's handwriting, dated 4 months before he died. It was addressed to a David Hayes at a return address Claire did not recognize. But the envelope was unsealed. The letter had never been sent. She opened it. Her father had written, "David, I do not know if this letter will reach you. I do not know if you remember me, or if you want to. I have heard, through a friend of a friend, that you are working a janitorial route in Portland. I will not pretend to understand what you have lived through. I will only say this. I am sorry I did not try harder to find you. I was afraid of intruding on your grief, and I told myself that was respect. I think now it was cowardice. The bridge you built is still standing. It carries 30,000 cars a day. Every one of those cars carries a person, and every one of those people gets home safely because of you. You are remembered here by me, always. If you are ever ready, my door is open." The letter ended there. It was not signed. Her father must have been planning to come back to it. He must have run out of time. Claire sat at her desk and cried for the first time in a long time. Then she stood up. She had work to do. The next morning, she went looking for the original blueprints. She found them in a flat metal cabinet in the basement archive, behind a row of boxes nobody had touched in years. The cabinet was locked. She knew the combination because her father had used the same combination for everything. Her mother's birthday. The blueprints were inside, in a flat envelope. The paper was yellowed at the edges. She took them upstairs. She laid them out next to the current revised plans. She did not need an engineering degree to see it. The 2 cross beams that Daniel had mentioned were there, on the original. They were missing on the revision. She pulled the revision history. The change had been approved by Victor 8 years ago, when he was head of project management. Victor had personally signed off on the removal of the cross beams. He had not done it on purpose. She wanted to believe that. There was no proof he had done it knowingly. It might just have been a mistake. A young manager, trying to save the company money on maintenance, had simplified a drawing he did not fully understand. But here was the harder truth. When the cracks first appeared, when Walter was struggling, when Daniel was offering an answer that could save the bridge, Victor's first instinct had not been to ask if Daniel was right. His first instinct had been to make Daniel disappear. She called Victor into her office that afternoon. She had 3 things on her desk: the original blueprints, the revision history with his signature on it, and a printout of the security footage from Saturday morning. He looked at all 3. He sat down without being asked. He started to speak. She held up one hand. "Victor, I am not going to argue with you. I am not going to fight. I am going to ask you one question, and I would like the truth." He waited. "When you saw that drawing on Walter's desk, did you know it was correct?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I suspected. And you fired him anyway." "I was protecting the company." She looked at him. "No, Victor, you were protecting yourself." He did not reply. "I am not going to make this a public scandal," she said. "That is not who I want to be, and it is not who my father would have wanted me to be. But you cannot stay here. I will give you a quiet exit. 3 months, a reference letter that does not lie, but does not destroy you. After that, you are on your own." She stood up. "I would also like you to understand one thing before you leave. The man you fired could have walked into this office 12 years ago and asked for anything. A title, a promotion, equity. He never did. He came back as a janitor, in silence, and he tried to fix our mistake without ever asking for credit. That is the difference between you and him, and I want you to think about that every day for the rest of your career. Victor stood up. He left without saying another word. That weekend, Claire drove to Daniel's apartment. She had to look up the address from the cleaning company's payroll file. It was a small building on the east side of Portland, the kind of building you walk past 100 times and never notice. She rang the doorbell. The door was opened by a small girl in pink pajamas, holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear. "Hi," the girl said. "Hi," Claire said. "Is your dad home?" "He's making pancakes." "Can I talk to him for a minute?" The girl looked at her with the very serious attention of a 6-year-old assessing a stranger. "You can come in," she said, "but you have to take off your shoes." Claire smiled. She took off her shoes. Daniel came around the corner from the kitchen. He was wearing a faded t-shirt and jeans. There was flour on one of his sleeves. He saw Claire. He stopped. He did not look surprised. "Hannah," he said, "why don't you go play in your room for a few minutes?" Hannah looked at Claire one more time. Then she looked at her father. She nodded. She walked off down the hallway, talking quietly to her rabbit. Daniel and Claire stood in the small kitchen. She placed 3 things on the kitchen table: the original blueprints, the unsent letter from her father, and a folder. He looked at the letter first. He picked it up. He read it slowly. His face did not change, but his hand tightened on the paper, just a little. When he finished, he placed it back on the table. He did not say anything for almost a minute. Then he asked, "When did he write it?" "4 months before he died. He never sent it. I think he meant to. I think he just ran out of time." Daniel nodded. He looked at the floor. Claire spoke quietly. "Daniel, I am not here to ask you to forgive me. I am not here to fix what happened. I am here because we have a bridge that 30,000 people drive across every day, and the only person who fully understands how it was built is standing in this kitchen. And I am here because my father wrote you a letter that I think he should have written 10 years ago. I am sorry it has to come from me instead of him." Daniel was quiet. She slid the folder across the table. "I would like you to come back. Not as a janitor, as a structural design consultant. You set the hours, you set the terms. You can work from home most days. You can bring Hannah to the office whenever you need to. You will be paid what you should have been paid all along. And your name will be on the corrected blueprints, where it should have been from the beginning." He opened the folder. He read the contract slowly. He read every page. He did not skim. When he was done, he looked up at her. "There is one thing I want," he said. "Not in the contract." She waited. "I want you to talk to the engineers. All of them. Walter, the young ones, the interns. I want you to tell them that the answer to the bridge problem came from a man they walked past every night without saying hello. Not because I want credit, but because the next time they see a quiet person doing a quiet job, I want them to wonder." Claire nodded. "I will do that. I will do it on Monday morning." He picked up the pen. He signed the contract. The signature he wrote was the same signature that appeared on the original blueprints from 12 years ago. Same angle, same shape, same quiet, careful hand. Hannah came back into the kitchen at exactly the wrong moment. Or maybe exactly the right one. She was holding her stuffed rabbit. She was wearing one sock. "Are you staying for pancakes?" she asked Claire. Claire glanced at Daniel. He almost smiled. "You can stay if you want," he said. Claire stayed for pancakes. She sat at the small kitchen table with a man she had fired 3 weeks ago, and his 6-year-old daughter, and a stuffed rabbit named after a button. And she ate pancakes that were a little too brown on one side, and she listened to a small girl explain why Mondays needed luck. And for the first time in 18 months of running her father's company, she understood what he meant when he said, "Listen to the ones nobody else does." The bridge was repaired over the next 4 months. The 2 crossbeams were rebuilt. The cracks were patched. The bridge was inspected and recertified. It will likely stand for another 50 years. Daniel works at Meridian Engineering now. He has a small corner office on the engineering floor. There is a yellow coffee mug on his desk with a chip on the rim. There is a drawing on the wall, made in crayon by a 6-year-old, of a bridge with a stick figure standing on top of it. The stick figure is smiling. Walter eats lunch with him 3 times a week. The young engineers have stopped calling him the consultant and started calling him by his name. He goes home every day at 5. There is one thing I want you to take from this story. Every building you walk into has people in it. Most of them you will never know. The man who cleans the office, the woman who fixes the elevator, the quiet person at the end of the hallway who you have never said hello to. You do not know who they were before they became invisible to you. You do not know what they built. You do not know what they lost. You do not know what they could still do if anyone bothered to ask. The world is full of Daniels, people who used to be something, people who still are something, people who are waiting quietly for someone to look up from their own life long enough to see them. Be the person who sees them. You will never regret it. And one day, when you need help, you might find that the answer is standing right next to you, in a grey uniform, holding a mop, saying nothing at all, until you ask. If this story moved you, leave a comment with one word. Just one word. The first word that comes to mind. I read every single comment. And if there is someone in your life you have been walking past without seeing, send them a message today. Don't wait until you need them. Don't wait until it's too late. Thank you for staying with me to the end. I'll see you in the next story.